Hi, everyone. That's nice, very nice. Thank you so much for coming here. You guys obviously know this is Miranda Barnes and Stella Johnson. I'm going to just briefly read their bios, which are like no big deal, just a little impressive. So Miranda Barnes was born in Brooklyn in 1994. Yep. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts in Humanities and Justice from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in 2018. And she participated in the 2017 New York Portfolio Review, and her work focuses on race, politics, and notions surrounding American culture, American culture, period. Her clients include the New York Times, Time, Vice, and ESPN's The Undefeated, and her work has been featured on Art News, The Huffington Post, Nylon Magazine, ID, and BuzzFeed, and she resides and works here in Brooklyn. So, perfect, yeah. So excited. Also, Miranda has a giant print in the Diversify Photo container, which is number 18, so go check that out after the Q&A. It may actually be larger than she is. I think it is, actually. Yeah, it is. Larger than all of us, all three. Yeah, small ladies, woo. Okay, Stella Johnson received a Cora Fulbright Scholar Grant to photograph in Mexico in 2003, and then two Fulbright Senior Specialist Grants to teach in Mexico in 2006, and then in Colombia in 2018. Her monograph, Al Sol, Photographs from Mexico, Cameroon, and Nicaragua, was published by the University of Maine Press in 2008. Her photographs have been widely exhibited in the US and internationally. She holds teaching positions at Boston University and at Lesley University College of Art and Design, and she teaches workshops in Greece, Cuba, Colombia, and Mexico, and she holds a BFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and an MS in journalism from Boston University, and her work is held in public collections at the De Corvo Museum and Sculpture Park, the Haggerty Museum of Art, the Museum of the Arts Houston, I wrote House, but that's fine, Portland Museum of Art, and the Southeastern Museum of Photography, among others. So give it up for Stella. So today we're going to talk about some of the dynamics at play of being an outsider versus being an insider photographing in different communities. There are obviously benefits and disadvantages to working in both ways. So I was wondering if you two would talk about some of the pros and cons of working as an outsider.
No, we're going to show our
Stella, go ahead, start.
Or you want to go for the conversation?
We can start with work. Work's nice.
Well, we'll answer some of the questions.
Yeah. You want to talk while we roll? Okay.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the work that I've done over the last 40 years, and it will address some of these questions, and then maybe we could get to the questions later, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So it has been my great privilege to live in and get to know the people on the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua, and in Oaxaca, Mexico, and in the northeastern savanna of Cameroon, West Africa, and on the islands of Crete, Greece, and the island where my grandmother was born, Lesbos, Greece, which is where I'm working now. I want to make it clear that the relationships that I have made over these last years, 35 years, are far more important to me than any image I've ever taken, and certainly more important than any monograph I would have published, any book or anything, or any like I get on Instagram. You know, really, and these relationships speak to me today. They define who I am today, and I have been very lucky to have this opportunity. I want to talk about the work as being long-form storytelling. This was 35 years ago. We didn't have that term. It just has evolved that way. I have pictures that I wanted to show, but they're flowing around too fast. But I've been going back to the same families and photographing them for 35 years. And this little girl right there, she is the daughter of a little boy I knew when he was 3 years old. And so I have these intergenerational images, the way we are here now with this intergenerational panel, you know. Yes, we are different generations, you know, the three of us. And it's been a great privilege for me to be able to do that. I want to explain how I did it, though, because I think it's very important for anyone who wants to do this kind of work to understand the question of access and how does one gain access, and even if it's still possible today. I don't know, but the way I do it is it's called slow cooking. And so I will do a lot of research, I talk to a lot of people, I let people get to know me, and then I get to know them, okay? And slowly, slowly, I always have a camera, but it doesn't mean I take a picture right away. It could be hours, days, weeks, months before I take a decent picture. I take a lot of snapshots, so everybody wants that, you know, and I'll do that. The kids will stand up and they smile. But the actual image making that I think that I did want to make at that time, definitely. Last year, I went back to Mexico for the wedding of a young man I knew when he was 5, and he was 38. And the day after, all of the cousins were like, Stella, it's so great that you're here. And they brought out the pictures that I had taken of them years and years and years ago. And then we decided to do recreations of the same pictures using their children, standing in for them. So they are collaborating once again. And you understand, when I go back year after year after year, I'm living in a village. People get to know me. They are collaborating on telling their story, okay? Because I'm there for weeks and months, every single year. They know my story really well, and I know theirs. And now, because we have Instagram or Facebook Messenger, everybody's calling each other. And today, you won't believe it, this young man who I photographed for a parenting magazine on a story on homelessness, wrote to me. He must have seen the Photoville blurb on Instagram. He said, Stella, we want the pictures again. We've lost them, and we remember you. Could you please send the pictures? I said, yes, I'll contact you tomorrow. And I had another kid on Facebook, same thing. He called me because he's seen all the promo. So it's really kind of amazing, 35 years ago when I went to these villages in Mexico, there was one phone in a store, and that was it. And if there was a phone call for you, they would call you, and then they would they'd go on the loudspeaker and say, Doña Carmelita, your son Gustavo is calling, and come up to the house, come back to the store, and take your call in 10 minutes. I know that didn't answer your question. I'm very sorry, but I wanted to give a little bit of background of how the process worked.
Yeah, so I mean, in that case, you are starting out as an outsider, and then over time, in some ways, becoming an insider. Miranda, I'm wondering, how do you feel about the way that you work, and especially when you're working in Brooklyn, which is where you were born and raised, how does that dynamic change?
Well, sorry, I'm like not take it off. I would say that I am always constantly thinking of never being too voyeuristic or exploitive. So that's constantly on my mind, increasingly with gentrification also, sorry. And that's always in the back of my head when I do find a subject that I'm interested in photographing. So I have to have this awareness and responsibility of taking the picture, not just for my own sake, but for the subject's sake, because that's what goes out on their image. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
No, it does. I mean, I think there's something different about going to a place, and even when you do return, that you leave and then you return versus going home down the street. Correct. Or just living in that community.
Correct.
Right. We get to leave if we want to.
If we want to.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And that gives us a different perspective, too. It's an outsider's perspective, but it's a different perspective, and we bring to the communities different perspectives about, you know, education, about workshops, about professional photography. You know, I teach the kids in the communities photography. And not all of them have become professionals, but they know how to do it now. And it's another way, it's another form of expression. And now they can tell their own stories, should they choose to, you know.
So how, when you're working in especially poor communities of color in other countries, maybe this is less applicable now because of social media, where people can still see, I mean, you aren't, in some ways, you're never leaving entirely, you're still connected, so there's some accountability there, but how aware are you of your white, Western, female gaze and the history of the way that these communities have been depicted? Are you thinking about that in the field? Is that something that you think about just when you're editing?
Very sensitive to it, and I ask everybody to help me, like, figure it out in the community. Nothing gets published, even nowhere, anywhere doesn't it get printed without permission. Is this the way, you know, you want to be seen? Do I have permission to use it on Facebook, Instagram? Can I put it on my website if I choose to publish a book? You know, especially with children, but certainly with the adults. Yes, I'm very, very aware of that, and I want their input more than anything else. I'm photographing a lot of culture. I photograph weddings, not funerals, but, you know, quinceañeras and things like that, and daily life, making cheese. One of those pictures is making red wine. It looks like, you know, blood is coming down. It's actually delicious red wine. And that's in Greece. And that replicates what my grandfather did in the very basement of my house where I'm living now. He used to make red wine. So,
That's funny.
Yeah.
I wanted to just pause on this one. This is the photograph of Miranda's that is giant in container 18. Miranda, do you want to talk about this photograph?
Yeah, so I, back in 2016, started a series on black female twins, kind of inspired by my grandmother. And it was really hard at first because I didn't really know any living twins. My grandmother passed away a couple years before that. So I ended up searching black female twins on Instagram for hours to get this photo. I contacted randomly the mother, and she was very reluctant at first, but then was like, no, yeah, I like this, and I traveled all the way to the Bronx to get the photo. But it kind of just shows my persistency with how, you know, I've gone about my work. I did not go to art school, and I find that I had to really like learn from the ground up about my work. For example, like the New York Times portfolio review, I applied 4 years in a row before I got in, and I was never like not determined to do so. I was just like, okay, next year, you know, a little disheartened, but like, okay, next year. And the project that I got into it with was the twin series. So it's just kind of cool.
So you're really good at getting access. Has there ever been a time when you have tried and been persistent and you just have hit brick wall after brick wall and not been able to get access, and what did you learn from that?
Well, I think that I have a lot of subjects always that I want to take pictures of. And either they are like reluctant to let me in or whatnot. But in particular, this past June, I was on an assignment for the New York Times, photographing a mother who lost her son to violence in Baltimore at the hands of a campus cop. And that was like my first time really dealing with police brutality on a scale like that. I went there. She was super sweet, but at one point when I was photographing her, she just like looked at me and she was like, I don't even know why I'm taking these photographs. And I stopped taking the pictures, and I was just like, I won't take your picture because it's not going to benefit me if you decide to not want your photo taken. And she was kind of having, I think she was still grieving. Although it did happen in 2016, she was still, I think all the sort of moments were rehashed because we were in her space. And I said to her, I was like, what do you need right now? And she was like, I need coffee. And I was like, okay, go get your coffee. Like, I was like, what do you need me to do? And she was like, well, there's a shirt with Nook, his name, his face on it. Like, I can't find it. So I went through her closet for an hour trying to find this shirt. Wasn't even taking pictures. I was just looking for this shirt because I knew that it would calm her down, and I knew that that's what needed to happen to get the photo that I wanted, which was not her angry, which was not her upset, but her in a quiet moment that had to happen because the relationship was there. So I guess that's kind of sort of the issues that I face right now. I feel like I'm still emerging where I haven't gone through like roadblocks like that yet. But yeah.
What about you, Miranda? Stella? You must have hit some brick walls.
In my career as a working photojournalist, yes. In my personal work, no. People say no, I just move on. That's easy. So I was assigned by Parenting Magazine about 20 years ago to photograph families living in homeless shelters. And I went to numerous homeless shelters and pitched the story, and I got shot down time and time again, 4 or 5 times. Finally, a social worker took me aside. He said, Stella, take a deep breath, calm down. You're talking so fast, people are feeling hustled, okay? And I didn't want to take up all of their time, okay? So there was that issue. And later, I found the very family where I got a message today on Instagram about my photographs. The Santiago family from Puerto Rico, and I speak Spanish, and so we all felt very comfortable together. I took all of the pictures, and then they sent up a writer from Washington, D.C. She did the story. It went to New York, and it got killed because they were not, they were too dysfunctional, and they didn't look like the readership. In other words, they were Puerto Rican, and that's not what they thought the parenting readership was at that time. We're talking 20 years ago. I can't speak for what is going on in the magazine world today. I'm not involved. But that was it's a true story, and there it is. But so I did get shut down a lot, and then when I didn't, I still have this connection with this young man now on Instagram.
I wish it was hard to believe that scenario happened. But it's not. It's not hard to believe. And not calling out any particular places, but that kind of stuff, that kind of thinking does still go on.
They don't look like our demographic. That was the problem.
And there's also, you're bringing up another sort of power dynamic that I think is really challenging, that I'm very aware of as an editor, but that I think I used to be a photographer for a second. That's really challenging. You are the sort of face of your publication, and all of their editorial decisions and their legacy, for better or for worse, their credibility, whatever it is, you're the one interfacing with the person that you're trying to photograph, and then there are decisions that are made to use your photographs, to not use your photographs, what captions to write, headlines that accompany your photographs that you don't have control over.
You can control what you give them, though, and that is something very important. You take a lot of pictures, but you need to edit and make sure you only give them anything you can live with being published that won't hurt your subject. So I think you can make those decisions in advance. If you have to send in the old days, sometimes we had to send the whole roll of film, and that was a problem. But now, with digital, you can pick and choose. You may have to give the raw file so you can show that you haven't manipulated it, but you can determine which raw file to give. I know you shoot film, so that's, probably an issue still. You can't determine what they get to see.
I try to have the best judgment, though.
We all
And ideally, you have a really trusting relationship with your editor so
Correct.
that is a collaborative thing. But, have you ever dealt with a situation where maybe the caption that you submitted was rewritten in a way that it's still your byline, you don't always write the caption, or a headline accompanying a photograph. I mean, that certainly happened to me.
Oh yeah.
So how do you, and then have you dealt with backlash then from the people that you photographed, feeling like
It hasn't
you've
been
betrayed
towards
them?
me. I think it was towards the publication. And I've been like CC'd on all the emails. I see everything happening, but I'm not saying anything because I did the best that I could to show, the true subject. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's just, there's a lot that goes into all of this that I
Yeah.
think people aren't always aware of. So let's move on to another topic. Has there ever been a time, going back to the insider-outsider thing, has there ever been a time when you're working, and maybe this is different for a personal project versus an assignment where you have to deliver, where you've gotten into the story, you've done the research, and you realize, like, I really am not the person who should be telling this story. Someone from this community or somebody with different ties to this subject matter should be telling this story. And if so, how have either of you navigated that?
Well, I think that I constantly think of stuff like that when I'm on assignments and the work is pertaining to African Americans. I'm Caribbean American, and while I'm still Black in America, there are different issues that we face, and I am constantly thinking of stuff like that. For example, going to Memphis for the New York Times, I could barely understand a Southern accent. I had to ask like too many times, like, come again? What did you say? So I always constantly think of stuff like that, but at the same time, I try to remember that I am there for a reason. Once again, I still am so young that I haven't had these issues yet. But I do try to be mindful of them, and my privilege of, going to a different state, and seeing, the ramifications of slavery to a tiny town like Memphis or Charlottesville, that you wouldn't really see in New York,
Would you like to add anything, Stella?
I use collaborators all the time. So whenever I go to a new place, if I'm going to give a workshop or if I'm going to do a personal project, I find other people to work with. And so that's the advantage of being an outsider, because I bring a different voice. And I pay people to help me. It's a job, okay? So, but they're young photographers, and so hopefully I end up mentoring them, and they become part of my posse, and half of the posse is here today. A lot of my former students are here who live in New York, and so, but also I do it in Oaxaca, Mexico. I've done it in Cuba, where I've hired young photographers to help me. And so we have an intercultural experience. And if I am not representing the culture correctly, believe me, they're the first people to tell me. And now I'm finishing up my project in Greece. And I'm 100% Greek by blood, but I'm American. And they never neglect to tell me, you are not really Greek, Stella, okay? You are an outsider. And I'm like, okay, this is the outsider's gaze, and that's what it is,
One thing that I love is that you use the word collaborator, not fixer. So these are people
We
that
work
are,
together.
even though there is a financial transaction because you're hiring them, but you're working with, and there's a respect, I think, even just when you think about somebody that way versus I'm paying this person to fix my problems, where it's a one-way thing.
They do so much for me. I have the highest regard, and they become my friends because I've been going now to Oaxaca for 35 years and teaching there for the last 12 or 15, and I have the same people. Now I'm teaching with Yaritza Menjivar. We're co-teaching the class, and we use the same assistants, and they're part of the team. We are all one team. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, I'm very lucky to have my collaborators.
How the language, the language that you use to talk about the people that you're photographing, to describe the relationship that you have with your collaborators, how important do you think it is to share the language of, you speak Spanish and you're working in a lot of Spanish-speaking communities, or having a shared language, historical language, racial language of history and of being part of a certain narrative? Does that ever come up in your work as either an advantage of not sharing that language, or an advantage? It's all good. Or an advantage of sharing that language?
Well, I feel very lucky that I speak Spanish. It's mangled, but everybody understands me. And so it's opened up how many countries? Okay? All of Latin America and Spain.
Social change happens via well-told storytelling.
Sorry. We'll pause right there. Okay.
Okay, so, I have been very lucky to have, I learned Spanish on the street, and then I studied. So yeah, it's very helpful, but wait a minute, when I went to Greece, I didn't speak Greek initially, but the language, I remember hearing words from my grandparents, and I've been going back now for 11 years, and so I can speak Greek in the present tense. Better than nothing, but it's not great, it's very embarrassing, of course.
But it also shows people a level of respect that you've done work and invested time in wanting to be able to communicate. Miranda, did you have something you wanted to add on that?
I'm trying to think, but I don't really know.
That's all right. One piece of advice that you would give to other photographers?
I have a lot of advice.
One.
All right, now the one, listen, we need to not put the photograph first, okay? It's not about the image. It's not about Instagram. It's not about the clicks. It's about respect and context for the image, for the person, for the subject, for whatever it is that you're photographing. It's not about me. It's not about my winning any awards, okay? That's over. That day should have, should have sailed a long time ago. It needs to be about the people, and they have a right to collaborate. This is why, for me, it's very important. I ask permission to publish every single picture, which is obsessive, I understand, but I do it, and it makes me, I can sleep at night knowing that I have permission from every single person. They feel that they've been represented truthfully or at least correctly, whether or not that's, yeah.
I would say that for me, it's not just about also working hard, it's about remembering that and making sure that, you can also sleep at night. That's kind of what I was going to say. But also I think realizing that there are other ways of going about this, that the internet has opened up a world where 20 years ago I would not have been able to take the photos that I am taking now because I didn't go the traditional route. So I find that a lot of especially people of color photographers might get discouraged because they aren't going to that art school that they think will allow them to gain access to what they want. And that's not to say that art school isn't important. I find that the technical stuff that I need, I don't have, and I'm constantly trying to teach myself. But at the same time, I think that it's important to remember that we're in a moment right now where anyone can pick up a camera and really teach themselves. And I think that that's incredible because I feel like a living example of that.
I do want to push back a tiny bit on the idea that it's not about you, because while I agree with that completely, it also is about the photographer to a certain extent. I mean, the photographer's experience is always going to, no matter how much you may try to set it aside, that's always the perspective that you bring. And I have a lot of concerns just about the economics of our industry, and if you are not maybe submitting to get an award or to a contest or a prestigious thing, then how do you get on the radar of an editor so that you can even have a career and be in the position to do the work.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the portfolio review opened up everything. It was the moment where everything clicked and I got on the radar, because I don't have that following on Instagram that equates to it. And as we know, that's a whole other conversation. But I think about that a lot, about how lucky I am. I know I've worked hard, but also just how lucky I am, because that's just something about it. To have editors that really care about my work, care about my voice, and getting it out there is everything.
Yeah, because you can have the greatest work in the world or the best intentions, but if you can't do the work, then you can't do the work. If you can't make the work. You
I mean,
can't
half the
afford to
work, yeah,
make the work, then
half
you
the
can't
work
make
that
it.
you see up there has been on assignment. Otherwise, I would not have had the money to travel around, America and taking pictures. It's incredible. Yeah.
Wait a minute. What I had something on my mind, and I did want to say, when I started 35 years ago, there was a career in photography. I think it's really hard and very different today. And I've been very honest with my students, suggesting that, they ought to get a day job and do photography because they love it, not necessarily because they will make money. 35 years ago, I made a really good income. Now I'm teaching, making a fifth of what I used to make as a commercial editorial photographer. So I
And
have
in
a
some ways,
different...
teaching is subsidizing your photography.
Of course it is. Yes. No, I have to have a job. My photography has been nothing but a money pit for 35 years. I've never made a penny off of I've made the money, but it just went right back into the cameras and the repairs, to me, to the cameras, to all of it,
But I think being open and honest about that and realizing that there is no shame
No.
to having some other way to finance your work, because most people need that. So
Right.
I think, are we out of time? Oh, no. Okay, sorry. So, so is there, I know I said one piece of advice, but is there another piece of advice, a different topic that you'd like to discuss?
Whatever you do, do it with your heart, okay? Because there will be no financial remuneration. Seriously. But do it because you love it. It's the reason that you get up in the morning, okay? And if you don't have that, that's okay too. Then find something that does. It doesn't have to be photography, whatever it is. If it is photography, okay. And remember, you don't have to have the most expensive and best and greatest camera. What you're seeing here, what you're using is your brain and your heart, okay? It has nothing to do with the camera. It's not the best iPhone. And sorry, it's not the best Leica camera either, even though they're very nice. It's not about the camera. It's about the person. It's about the head and the heart. So, that's what I would also say.
I agree with that. That was beautifully stated. I want to talk about accountability to the people that you photograph, the communities that by association are depicted in your work, and whether that has changed in your time, where maybe when you were starting out, you might make a picture and you might have permission for it to be published, but the people that you photographed may or may not ever then see that in print, see it actually published, where now they can see that you're a Photoville.
Yes, exactly.
Same day.
But that's a beautiful thing, that we are accountable, and that makes us all that much more honest, right? Because everybody sees everything now. But in the same instance, it's going to be very hard. You can't photograph children anymore without their parents' permission. They don't want their images on the internet, and I don't blame them. I mean, there's a lot of crazy people out there, so there's that aspect to be very, very careful about, and yes, we are very accountable, and we should be. We absolutely should be. To me, the internet has made everything that much more democratic. We can share information now. before I didn't know what life was like in Cameroon, West Africa. I had to go there, or I could read, the National Geographic, or go to a library. Now all I have to do is Google it, and maybe you'll find my photographs from there, So it's a completely different world. Now we have it right at our fingertips. And you better be careful about what you put up there, because everybody will see it and call you out on it, and they should if it's incorrect.
And there's Google image results, right? Like now,
Yeah.
when somebody Googles one of the people that you photograph's name, your photographs may come up. So, and maybe that's the only time that they've been in the news or in the newspaper. That might be favored by the search engines.
Well, anytime I try to do personal work, whether that's like in Sunset Park or going to like the Caribbean Day Parade, I always try to get numbers and give them just so they know.
You mean phone numbers?
Phone numbers, emails, whatever contact they prefer. And most of the, I've had luck so far. I've never really had someone tell me to take something down because I took the photo of, I asked them first permission if I could get a photo of them. So I think that that's important also, just to give the photos back to the person, not just to take the photo and put it up on your website. Because most of the time the response I get is like, wow, I've never seen a photo like that before for me, especially when I'm taking pictures of like very masculine men at the Caribbean Day Parade who are like just like going crazy, and they're like, wow, I've never seen my photo taken that way. So I think that that's also important, and that's the mindset that I always try to have,
Have either of you ever encountered a situation where you did not have consent from the people that you were photographing, but still felt that there was either an overriding public interest or a very important historical moment? As an editor, I know that sometimes you can't always expect consent from the people that are being photographed. Because sometimes, would Paul Manafort ever allow anyone to photograph him right now? No, probably not.
Well, once he's on the sidewalk, on the perp walk, that's free, that's a freebie. Anybody can photograph him.
Right, legally you have the right to photograph anybody in public, anywhere, whether they're blowing their nose or looking super fly. But ethically, have you had to negotiate that?
I'm not in the business anymore, so, I do personal work. So I can, if people don't want me to photograph them, I put the camera down. To me, it's not worth hurting anybody. I can just walk away and take a picture another day.
But because you have worked as a journalist and you have a master's in journalism,
yes.
and you teach a lot of students who may be going into that. So how would you advise students to deal with that who may be going into photojournalism now?
Sure, public safety, something like that. Yes, if I saw somebody getting beat up and shot and hurt, I would definitely videotape it myself. There's no consent, obviously, okay? It depends on the situation, but if it's a sensitive situation and there's children involved, you have to be very careful. And then you could take the picture and then ask for consent after the fact. There's always after the fact, even if somebody's arrested, honestly.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point too, that like what you were talking about earlier, that you don't necessarily send every photograph that you make in for publication. But if you haven't made that photograph, then even if they change their mind, you can't make a picture that wasn't made.
No.
Miranda, I want to hear how you feel it's different working in your own communities when you're working in Brooklyn versus when you're working in Memphis.
I studied, history and law as my undergrad, so I find that the classes that I took come flooding to me when I'm in places that I know have been affected by things that I've read before. So, like, for example, I just did this assignment for the New York Times last month, and there was like I was on a plantation, and there was a 300-year-old oak tree, and I just started crying because I just knew that there's been bloodshed on that tree. It's just, I know, and I don't get the same effects here in Brooklyn. I don't know. I mean, it's just different because I feel like it's home here, and then you go. I mean, you're kind of in a bubble here, in many ways. So for me, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that insider-outsider dynamic, I
Correct.
think you're speaking to one of the benefits of sometimes being an outsider.
Oh,
is
totally,
that
yeah.
If you live there, maybe you walk past that tree every day,
Yeah.
you stop noticing certain
Mhm.
things.
Totally. It's having the sensitivity also for it. I get choked up on every assignment that I do. When it's like, something heavy as that, because I think I'm emotional, one, but two, I need to have that to also remind myself to take the best photo that I possibly can and highlight whatever topic that I am talking about in the best way possible.
So is it allowed to cry? I mean, is it okay? Like, are you allowed to cry when you're on assignment?
I cry. I cry.
But don't
We're
you have
human.
to be professional?
Aren't we human? Who cares? We're human. If you
So
know.
emotions are okay?
I think so. Yeah, they're okay for me. I don't care what anyone else thinks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I wasn't. I was just holding it.
Claps for tears.
Really fun.
Claps for crying. No, I think that's really beautiful because I mean I know that I've definitely felt like, oh God, no, I'm gonna start crying. I need to be like holding it together right now. I'm supposed to be, professional.
I've cried with the subjects before. We've taken breaks and we've cried together. I have to. Yeah. I think it helps me also remind myself that I'm here for a reason.
And then do you have any rituals that you do, maybe not even rituals, but what do you do to process the trauma that you have experienced, that you've read about, maybe that you photograph, the stories that you hear? I mean, secondary trauma is real, and hearing about traumatic things, even if you have not personally witnessed it, can be traumatic to like your physical brain in your head. How do you process that?
Jersey Shore.
I was going to say the same thing. I go to the beach.
It's so bad, and I just need it sometimes in the background. It's really bad. No, but in all seriousness, I try to think about the positives that day. I mean, it's hard. I feel like I'm still learning, and that's also something that I have to get better at, which is not taking on that stress, because I do take it on, but taking it on in a way that only helps me further tell the story in the best way and not get impacted by it, mentally and emotionally.
Right, because like money, if it breaks you down too much, I mean, a certain level of empathy is a beautiful thing. It helps you connect with people and make the kind of photographs that have gotten you to on the stage today, but too much and you're crippled, paralyzed, and you can't make the work either. Stella, do you have any advice maybe? What do you tell your students when they're like, oh my God, this is so heavy, how do I deal?
You have to feel it. I mean, also, and then you have to have some self-care ritual that you described. You're the Jersey Shore. I go to the beach. Yoga, stand on your head, breathe deeply. But honestly, you have to feel that. How can you be in a situation when people are suffering and not feel that? Of course we feel it. You're right. And then you have to have your own ritual of self-care and figure out what that is for you. Yours is different than mine, right? So whatever that is.
Painting window trim.
There you go. Whatever it may be. But yeah. But I think it's really incumbent on us to make sure that we can feel, we have to have that empathy, God damn it.
Who here is a photographer? And who, okay, a lot of photographers. And who here just like is a normal human who just loves photography? Okay, so speaking to the second group here, what do you wish that people who don't make photographs for a living really understood about the kind of work that we do? Sorry, I know that wasn't a question you got in advance to prep for, but like, are there any misconceptions about the work that we do? Yeah, what are some of the misconceptions?
I work really hard every single day of my life. Really hard. I don't know how else to say it, but it's not just taking the photo, it's everything that comes along with it. If it's film, you're archiving, you're scanning, you're making sure you get good scans of those, those negatives, because if you mess up that negative, it's gone forever. Networking, this is all unpaid work that you're putting in. You're not getting paid for that. So it's a lot. It's a lot of, in a way, it's a very selfless job, because people just see the final product without everything that comes along with it. That's what I'm learning.
Well, I was thinking that people have to understand we're not predators. We're not taking their picture. Not everybody is. Of course, there are predators out there, but we want to make an image. And I really think take and make are two different concepts. And so I would like to stress the idea that we're making images and that my students understand that. That goes back to my idea originally of collaborating with my people, okay? And they become my posse and my friends for life because we work together making as opposed to taking.
And how is it different when you are working on a personal project, something that is self-assigned? Maybe you hope to make it into a book or to have it published later, but you don't have a deadline going. How is that different than working for the New York Times or on assignment?
Oh, not having a deadline is a luxury. Deadlines are really stressful. So having the freedom to have it ebb and flow the way you want it is like a gift. Deadlines are really, really hard. Anyone who's been in the biz knows if you miss that deadline, you'll never work in this town again, right? We know that. So
it's a very small town.
I know, and I never lived here, but I worked for a lot of magazines in my day here from New York. So, yeah, deadlines are tough on the system.
I like having the flexibility of picking and choosing, and also being able just to go out for 2 or 3 hours out of an afternoon when I'm feeling like walking around. And if I don't get a photo, I'm not mad. It was just like the idea of just getting out the house and walking around, not really doing anything. I sometimes do that. I don't also just watch Jersey Shore. I do walk around.
Oh, you meant watching the Jersey Shore. I thought you meant going to the Jersey Shore.
Oh, no.
That's why I was applauding, because I was like, yeah, Jersey.
No. I liked having it in the background. Something about having Snooki scream is
very
really
different. But in order to do self-assigned work, personal work, whatever you want to call it, you also have to be very disciplined and personally motivated. There's nobody telling you, oh no, you watched too much Jersey Shore today, get outside. So that's not even just a photo question, that's kind of just an entrepreneurial, like small business freelancer thing. Do you have any tips about that? How do you keep yourself on
It goes back to you better do what you love. Because why do you get up in the morning? To go out and take your camera out for a walk and take pictures. That's why I do it. That's the motivation. If I didn't love it, I would do what I love. The other thing I love to do is go swimming. Not that Jersey Shore, my other type of shore. So,
Most of the Jersey Shore is actually really beautiful. I just need to say, as a New Jersey resident, it's a beautiful state.
Good to know.
How do you keep yourself disciplined and motivated?
Oh man, it's hard, but I do take breaks at the same time. I do find myself sometimes working too hard, and then I crash, and that's not good. So I do have to go in intervals. But you're right. It's just the sort of self-discipline and wanting to do it because you actually like to do it. Because no one's telling you to continue, unless, you have a supportive partner or, family members. But people in the business, they're not doing that.
And even supportive partners might sometimes be like, what do you mean you have to go out now? You have this family obligation. How do you guys find stories? How do you decide what to photograph and how to photograph it? And how do you find people to photograph besides Instagram or, as one of the tools that you use?
Random encounters. One of my stories I always tell is that I was jogging through Sunset Park last year, and I came across the Chinese community doing Tai Chi there, and just had the random idea of going up to them and being like, "Can I join you guys?" And of course, no one spoke English, and they just looked at me like, "Yeah, sure," not thinking that I'd actually come back the next day, but I did, and now we're friends. So, I always sometimes find myself finding random stories like that, which always makes for the nice little intro to the photos. But I also find that it makes the photos better, So I just took pictures of them for the first time this past July because I felt uncomfortable doing so up until then. I didn't think it was my story. I didn't think it was my place. I really had never brought my camera there up until July.
You were an outsider.
I was an outsider, but they were so excited. We were taking selfies together, so it was the final. I was like, I'm gonna run back home and get my camera. They're like, okay, so I did, Yeah, so it feels good when you finally have that breakthrough where you feel comfortable enough knowing that you worked to get that sort of in.
All of my personal work came from this desire to understand how my Greek grandmothers grew up in these villages without running water and electricity, ones that I visited when I was 17 years old with my parents, coming from a middle-class suburb in Boston, and there's no running water and electricity, and I'm like, oh my God, how do people do this? And I spent 35 years on the road in Mexico and in other countries, ending up back in Greece, realizing, okay, what it's all about is community, family, and friendship. It's all about that stuff. That's how people survive. They work together. In Mexico, they have the comadres. They all help each other, okay? They raise each other's children, and they work together. And so, but that was the motivating factor. And when I went to Mexico, I stayed in a Mexican hotel in Mexico City. This is in the 1980s, okay? And at night, there was the waitress, and she had lost her home to the earthquake in 1985. Huge disaster in Mexico City. And I got to know her, and over time, I became the godmother to her 3-year-old child. And then I was invited to the village where she was born. And it was her mother who I went to see 3 years ago, who's now 90-something, and is a great-great-grandmother. And that's how I got started with that one project of the many. But that's how they get started. The interest in how do people live outside of my sort of middle-class, sanitized, easy version of the world.
I think it's really interesting how often photographers, whether consciously or subconsciously, are motivated by trying to understand something about their own families. You talked about your grandmother was a twin, and you're talking about your grandmothers trying to understand how they worked. I think we also often talk about the photographs, but can you talk a little bit about how the process of making the photographs and working on a project, what value that process can have on helping you to find those answers and kind of figure out what you've been trying to explore?
But I participate with the people I'm collaborating with. So I'm sitting down next to them the way we are right now. You and I are engaged in this conversation that we're never going to forget. And of course, it's being videotaped also. So, but the point is that we're in this together. And so we cook together and we clean together. And so that was how I was able to understand, oh, you know, in Nicaragua, the women had to go get the firewood. And I would follow them out to get the firewood and then bring it back. If you wanted hot water for your coffee, that's how it was made. You had to go get the firewood. Then you had to go down to the well and get the water. But the cousins had cleaned out the well. You know, together they worked to clean out the well, that sort of thing. So that's how I learned, by participating. But I'm saying I spent a lot of time. So I was very lucky to be in the business when I could make money, so that then I could have the time to go and spend in these places and live with people and see how they survived. That's what informed what I got to know.
Trying to think. Sorry. I guess I would say I try to also understand the history. I try to do as much research as possible before going into a situation, if it's on assignment, of course. So just understanding like the demographic and large events that have happened in the city. But that's also hard because once you get there, everything that you thought you researched could be completely different. So I think it's also like reading a room, for example, and thinking on the fly. I think that that's very important. And just also just keeping that in mind, that it might just be a totally different thing, you know.
Yes. That happened to me on numerous occasions. What I thought I was going to get into was completely different. So you have to be flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and recognizing, because that's when you can fall into a lot of tropes and stereotypes when you are projecting what you assume the story may
Totally.
be. I should have asked at the beginning, but how did you two get into photography? Miranda, how did you make the switch from studying criminal justice to photography?
I feel like I've always had a thing for photography. I mean, I remember being in like high school wanting to carry around a disposable camera, but I think I was trying to be cooler than what I thought I was. So it's a different story. But I think about it now, and I think I was just really inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that was like the moment where I realized that I wanted to document, and not just with my camera phone. You know, I wanted to really get a camera and actually have photos that I could look back at. And I do still sometimes think about those photographs because that's still so recent in our history, you know. But for me, it was like the start of realizing that I wanted to document events like this that were timely and needed to be documented.
I got started by watching my grandmother with her Brownie camera, and she would take pictures. And now I remember, of course, they didn't have pictures when they fled Greece. They were fleeing hunger and war, and they were eating dandelions, okay? They were that hungry.
Now you can get those at some New York City restaurants.
I know, but I'm telling you, back in those days, it wasn't chic. They were starving. And so when she came to Boston, she had that, you know, a Brownie camera. And I asked when I was 12 years old for a camera from my godparents. And I remember my father yelling at me until forever, don't take too many pictures, the film is too expensive, you know. And to this day now, I shoot digital, not film. For this reason, I'm pretty sure.
The film is very expensive.
Yes, it is very expensive. He'd be like, okay, you took one picture, that's enough. Put the camera away. You know, and I'd be like, oh, okay. No, you know, so, but yes, I started when I was 12, and then I took workshops forever, and then I went to art school, and I really started in the career when I went to graduate school. I started working for magazines and corporations, and then I realized a way I could make money off of photography. This is 30 years ago, and then, you know, it sustained the personal work. Yeah.
I think we're going to wrap up now. Thank you guys so much for coming.